Hello everybody, in this video we have a few great tips for each support to help you start climbing today. But before we hop into this video, make sure that you go over to GameLeap.com if you want guides similar to this one that are coming out every single day. We have tons of guides for all different heroes, including the new heroes in the game, and make sure that you go and sign up if you want to start learning how to rank up today. Ana is the first hero on our list. Whenever you're playing Ana, you are very vulnerable to dive. You should always be checking the scoreboard to see if any enemy heroes can easily dive you or snipe you from a range. If you're facing dive heroes like Genji or Winston, or maybe even Tracer, then you absolutely need to be saving your sleep dart specifically for whenever the enemies dive you, and pretty much nothing else. You don't want to be using it aggressively, and you really only want to be saving it for when that Winston or the Genji is up in your face and you have no other way to get away. Your grenade should also be saved for either yourself or anyone that is threatening to be dove on your team to quickly heal them back up. Your nade can also be really strong against Genji players that are deflecting, simply throwing it at a wall or a nearby ground to easily hit him through his deflect with the splash damage. One great tip for hitting your sleep dart is you can actually take some damage. You don't have to always use it when the enemy is far away or dashing towards you. You can take some damage from the enemy and lull them into a sense of confidence where they're not going to be expecting you to just throw out that sleep dart after they've hit you a few times. It might seem a little bit scary, but just waiting till the enemy is close enough or till they waste their defensive cooldowns like deflect or bubble before you use your sleep dart can easily mean the difference between you actually hitting it and completely whiffing. Next up, Baptiste is one of my favorite support heroes, and if you're a DPS player swapping to support, he's an absolute blast to play and you should give him a try. My first tip with Baptiste is knowing whether you should be damaging or healing at any given time. This one is not so simple, but a good rule of thumb is that if a fight is actively happening, for example, your tank and the enemy tank are in front of each other, and you're not walking back from spawn as well as the enemy's not walking back from spawn, then you should primarily be focused on healing. Keeping your team alive is your primary goal as any support, and as Baptiste, it can be tempting to try and DPS down the enemies, especially if your DPS aren't really pulling their weight. But you have to be really good at making sure that you are not tunnel visioning on the enemies when it comes to DPSing as a support player. Making sure that if you're actually shooting at an enemy, it's someone that either needs to be focused by you to get that elimination, or your team currently doesn't need any help with healing. For example, if you're walking back from spawn, then you can DPS the enemies as you're getting back, or if the enemies are walking back from spawn, you can DPS them before they get into the fight and actually start damaging your team. Another great tip for Baptiste is that you really want to always be staying crouched. Staying permanently crouched, other than when you're rotating or running back from spawn, allows your jump to be permanently charged, which makes you pretty much invincible against any sort of dive that comes your way. The only thing you really have to be careful about is enemy snipers like Widowmaker, who can easily take advantage of you being in the air constantly and hit those easy headshots. Brigitte, while being one of the less popular supports right now, can be extremely strong when played correctly. One thing you want to try and do with Brigitte is always be landing your whip shot ability on an enemy. Make sure that it's not on a shield or else it won't work. If you don't know already, Brigitte's passive heals similar to LUCIO heals, except she needs to attack an enemy with one of her abilities to make it work. Whether it's her primary fire or her whip shot or even her shield bash, you can use any of her abilities to trigger it, but your whip shot is going to be the easiest and safest. You can actually permanently keep her passive going since it lasts for 5 seconds and her whip shot only has a 4-second cooldown, but you need to be landing every single whip shot for this healing to actually work. And if you can manage to actually land all of your whip shots on enemies while staying near your teammate, your healing is going to absolutely skyrocket, and you're going to be an insane Brig player if you can master doing this. Another great tip for Brigitte is you never want to let her shield fully break. There are times that you can use 1 health of her shield to block something huge like a Rhine Shatter or a Diva Bomb, or even something as simple as like a Widowmaker headshot. You just need to make sure that you aren't holding her shield until it fully breaks and let yourself take some damage or back off to cover before it breaks. Your shield will come back much faster this way instead of allowing it to break. KIRIKO is the newest support in the game and she is extremely strong at not only healing but also dealing damage. As KIRIKO, you should try not to play directly behind your teammates. You can easily play on off angles or high grounds or even to the side of your teammates or under the enemies even, and all you really have to do is whenever you start getting focused is just teleport back to your team. It's super simple with KIRIKO because you can easily wait waste the enemy's time with these bad positions. Well, I guess they're not bad positions since you can easily escape, but they're seemingly bad positions to the enemies, and it will force them to waste their time and positioning on trying to kill you. The same tip for Baptiste also applies with KIRIKO. Since she can deal a lot of damage, you need to make sure you're actually focusing on healing your teammates more than you're focusing on hitting your kunai headshots. You can easily tunnel vision into DPSing, and then all of your teammates will be dead when you realize that you've already missed all of your shots. As KIRIKO, whenever you get focused by the enemy team, whether it's being dove or in one of your off-angle positions, you want to start backing away from your teammates, creating space in between you and your teammates, leading the enemies further away, and then teleporting away whenever you need to. This makes it so that the enemies, whenever you finish teleporting, are even further away from your team instead of pulling the enemies towards your team and then teleporting, because then the enemies will have less distance to close and it will be a lot harder to fight them off. And lastly for KIRIKO, her ultimate is a projectile that runs along the ground, and it will stop whenever it hits any sort of terrain, so make sure you don't accidentally throw it into a wall or the payload or a small piece of cover, or else it won't go nearly as far as you intended. For LUCIO, you want to go into his hero specific settings and make sure you change backwards wall ride to on instead of the default, which is off. This makes it so that you can actually wall ride in any direction without actually facing that direction. With LUCIO, communication can be extremely important. Whether you're pinging or typing in chat or even using your voice, you want to be communicating with your tank and either telling him that you're going to be speeding him in or ask when they wanted to be speeding in. If you just amp speed without saying anything, chances are nothing is going to come out of it unless you said something beforehand. And most of the time that's just going to result into you running into the enemy team and dying alone. This is why you always want to be trying to set up plays as LUCIO, whether it's speeding your team into the enemy team or speeding your team away or just amping your heals on your team, but make sure you're communicating whenever you're using your amp ability so that your tanks know when they can and can't go in. One last tip for LUCIO is that your secondary fire boop ability can send enemies further away depending on the direction you're looking. If you're using it while looking downwards at them, they will go a shorter distance than if you were looking at them or straight up into the air when you're using your boop on them. Mercy's Guardian Angel ability has some really cool quirks with it that allow you to become super difficult to actually hit if you use it correctly. Firstly, whenever you're using this ability, you can press your jump key at any point to push you further in the direction that you're facing. Depending on the charge meter, you will go shorter or further distance, but it's really not that amazing. Secondly, you can press backwards and jump at the same time, and it will launch you backwards away from your target. This can be extremely useful when you're flying to a DPS player that might be a bit too far in, and you can back away from him while still being able to heal them. Lastly, you can press crouch at any time during the ability as well, and you will launch vertically really high up, depending on the charge. This is probably going to be the best use for it, as it allows you to constantly be floating or taking high ground so that the enemies can no longer easily shoot you. MOIRA is the queen of DPSing as support, or at least my teammates seem to think so. One great tip for MOIRA is that her fade ability is not a go-in ability. Try to never use this ability to go forward into the enemy team or even towards your tanks. You really only want to be using this ability to escape or to reposition, not to go in and play aggressive with it. The reason for this is that you're a super vulnerable target to any DPS and tank without your fade ability, and you will be focused down and killed super quick if you're not careful. Fade can be used to kind of fling yourself off of the payload or other small pieces of cover to actually gain height or even high grounds on buildings. And one last tip from MOIRA is you want to try and position yourself with your ultimate behind your team so that you can shoot the beam through your teammates as well as the enemies while giving yourself a great view of the fight. Last on the list is ZENYATTA, and when playing ZENYATTA, you want to absolutely have at least a 60% uptime for both of your orbs. There is a little UI at the bottom of your screen next to your ultimate charge that shows you who you currently have your orb on and their health bar. This is super good because if you don't constantly have both of these on, then you're going to start having to focus a little bit more on keeping your orbs up at all time. His orbs disappear off of his target after 3 seconds out of being out of line of sight. This means that if you place it on your Genji or Tracer, chances are in 3 seconds it's going to be gone. You need to be hyper aware of whenever you need to replace it off of a DPS hero if you have it on one. You can easily place it on a tank where you'll just be able to kind of forget about it and stay behind your tank the whole game while constantly getting heals on them. Although you really do want to keep it on a DPS player as much as possible if they can stay within your line of sight for long enough. Your Discord orb is really great when used on immobile tanks like Reinhardt and Orisa, but most of the time you want it on a DPS or support so that you can help your teammates pressure and burst them down. And one last tip for Zen is that his ultimate can actually body block block damage for your team. For example, if the enemy has a Mei and your team gets ulted, what you can do to save your Tracer player who can get one shot through your ultimate is just stand in front of that Mei who's about to kill your Tracer through your ult and just body block the icicles. It's as simple as that. Now, I want to hear if you guys have any cool tips for me on all of these support heroes in the comments below. And thank you all for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day. Make sure that you check out our Overwatch 2 website. It is constantly being updated with new guides on every single hero, so make sure that you check out the website link right now in the description or go to GameLeap.com and sign up today.